The rain hammered against the towering glass windows of the Whitmore Gallery as Emma Chen stood in the marble foyer, her second-hand shoes creating small puddles on the pristine floor. 23, with her mother's worn leather portfolio clutched against her chest, she watched the city's elite glide past her as if she were merely another piece of furniture. Her reflection in the polished surfaces showed what they saw: a girl from Bethnal Green who didn't belong in Mayfair's gleaming heart. "You're late." Victoria Whitmore's voice cut through the morning bustle like a blade through silk. The gallery director stood at the top of the curved staircase, her silver hair pulled into a severe chignon, her black dress as sharp as her reputation. Emma's heart sank. She'd arrived 30 minutes early, but apparently not early enough for London's most feared art curator. "I'm sorry, Ms. Whitmore, the tube was..." "Excuses are for those who failed to plan." Victoria descended the stairs with practiced elegance, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm that made Emma's pulse race. "In my gallery, we anticipate problems before they become problems. If you cannot manage something as simple as punctuality, perhaps this internship isn't for you." Emma bit her tongue, tasting the familiar copper of swallowed pride. 3 months without pay, her mother working double shifts at the hospital to help with rent, all for this chance to break into a world that seemed determined to keep her out. "It won't happen again, Ms. Whitmore." Victoria's grey eyes studied her with the same cold calculation she used to appraise artwork. "See that it doesn't. Marcus will show you to the archives. You'll be cataloguing acquisitions. Try not to touch anything valuable." The director turned away, dismissing Emma as easily as one might wave away smoke. In the basement archives, surrounded by crates and carefully controlled humidity, Emma found her sanctuary. Marcus, the head archivist, was a gentle soul who treated her with the first kindness she'd encountered within these walls. "Don't let her get to you," he whispered, showing her the cataloguing system. "Victoria Whitmore has turned coldness into an art form. Been that way for years now, though some say she wasn't always like this." Days blurred into weeks. Emma became an expert at invisibility, learning to navigate the gallery's hierarchies and hidden rules. She observed Victoria from afar, watching how the director commanded respect through fear, how she could destroy careers with a single phone call, how she dismissed any talk of the gallery's social responsibility with withering contempt. "We're not a charity," Victoria had announced at a staff meeting, rejecting a proposal for community outreach. "We deal in excellence, not handouts." Yet something didn't add up. Once a month, a new painting would arrive, delivered by a nondescript courier service, always unsigned. They were breathtaking, raw, emotional pieces that seemed to capture the very essence of human suffering and hope. The anonymous collection, as it became known, sold for millions, with every penny going directly to homeless shelters across East London. The irony wasn't lost on Emma. The very communities Victoria publicly scorned were being secretly supported by art flowing through her gallery. The mystery consumed Emma's thoughts as she worked alone in the archives, carefully documenting each piece's journey from arrival to sale. Who was this artist who chose anonymity over acclaim? Why did Victoria, who seemed to value nothing but prestige and profit, allow these charitable sales to continue? On a particularly bitter February evening, Emma stayed late to finish cataloguing the latest anonymous piece, a haunting portrait of a young woman standing at the edge of Waterloo Bridge, her face turned away from the viewer, her posture speaking of a decision unmade. The gallery was empty, the security guard doing his rounds on the upper floors. Emma was about to lock the archive when she noticed Victoria's office door ajar, a sliver of light cutting through the darkness. She knew she should leave, knew that curiosity in this world could end careers before they began. But something pulled her forward, perhaps the same instinct that had driven her to art in the first place, the need to understand, to see beyond surfaces. Through the crack in the door, Emma saw Victoria Whitmore as she'd never seen her before. The ironclad director sat hunched over her desk, her elegant facade crumbled like old paint. In her hands, she held a photograph, worn at the edges from constant touching. Even from the doorway, Emma could see it was a young woman, perhaps early 20s, with Victoria's same sharp cheekbones but softer eyes, eyes that held light where Victoria's held only shadows. Victoria's shoulders shook silently, and Emma realized with a start that she was witnessing something profoundly private. She began to back away when her shoe scraped against the marble floor. Victoria's head snapped up, her tear-stained face transforming instantly into a mask of fury. "What are you doing here?" The words came out as a hiss. Emma's mouth went dry. "I was finishing the cataloguing. I saw the light and wanted to make sure everything was... Get out." Victoria stood, the photograph disappearing into her desk drawer with practiced speed. "If I find you snooping around after hours again, you'll never work in any gallery in Europe. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, fleeing into the February night with her heart pounding. But as she rode the night bus back to Bethnal Green, her mind raced with questions. Who was the girl in the photograph? And why did Victoria keep her hidden like a guilty secret? The next morning, Emma arrived to find a new anonymous painting waiting in the archives. This one depicted a young woman sleeping on a park bench, her belongings in a torn plastic bag, while the city rushed past in blurred indifference. As Emma began the documentation process, she noticed something that made her breath catch, a tiny detail in the corner, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. A small pendant around the sleeping woman's neck, identical to one she'd glimpsed in the photograph on Victoria's desk. Working with trembling hands, Emma cross-referenced the delivery schedules with Victoria's calendar. The pattern was undeniable. Every anonymous painting arrived when Victoria was supposedly at art fairs abroad. But flight records and hotel bookings, carelessly left in filed expense reports, told a different story. Victoria never left London during those times. She simply disappeared. The truth began to crystallize, impossible yet undeniable. Emma started paying closer attention to the paintings themselves, noticing techniques she'd seen in Victoria's early work, before she'd abandoned her artistic career to become a curator. The brush strokes, the color palette, the way light seemed to bleed through shadow, it was all there, hidden in plain sight. 3 weeks into her investigation, Emma made the ultimate discovery. She'd volunteered to reorganize the supply closet, a task so menial no one questioned it. Hidden behind boxes of archived invoices, she found them. Canvases, oils, brushes still wet with paint. And there, leaning against the wall, was a painting that would be delivered next month. She recognized the composition from a sketch she'd glimpsed on Victoria's desk. The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. Victoria Whitmore, the woman who publicly declared charity beneath the gallery's dignity, was secretly the anonymous artist, raising millions for the homeless. But why? What could drive someone to such elaborate deception? The answer came unexpectedly from Marcus during a quiet afternoon in the archives. "Did you know Victoria had a daughter?" he mentioned casually, not noticing how Emma's hands stilled over the keyboard. "Sophie, her name was. Brilliant girl, studied at Central St. Martin's, but something went wrong. Addiction, they say. Victoria threw her out, tough love and all that. The girl ended up on the streets." Emma's voice came out as a whisper. "What happened to her?" Marcus's face darkened. "Found dead under Waterloo Bridge 5 years ago. Overdose. They say Victoria never forgave herself. Changed overnight, became harder, colder, like she was punishing herself, you know? The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. The paintings weren't just art. They were acts of penance, each one a letter to a daughter who would never read it. Each sale, a desperate attempt to save other Sophies from the same fate. Emma carried the secret like a stone in her chest. Every morning, she watched Victoria stride through the gallery with her armor of indifference and saw instead a mother drowning in guilt. The anonymous paintings took on new meaning, each one a window into Victoria's private grief, her way of speaking to the daughter she'd failed to save. The knowledge changed everything and nothing. Victoria remained as cutting as ever, perhaps more so, as if sensing Emma's newfound understanding. During a particularly brutal critique of Emma's catalogue descriptions, Victoria leaned in close enough that Emma could see the concealer hiding dark circles under her eyes. "Mediocrity," Victoria said, her voice like ice, "is a choice, and you seem determined to choose it daily." But Emma heard what others couldn't. The projection, the self-hatred, turned outward. That evening, she spotted Victoria leaving through the service entrance, a large canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Emma followed at a distance, watching as Victoria made her way not to her Kensington townhouse, but to a converted warehouse in Hackney. Through a grimy window, Emma watched Victoria transform. The severe chignon came down, replaced by a chaotic bun. The designer dress gave way to paint-splattered jeans and an old jumper. And then Victoria began to paint with a fury that took Emma's breath away. Each brush stroke was violence and tenderness combined, creating beauty from pain. The painting emerging on the canvas showed a mother and daughter on a park bench, sharing chips, laughing at something beyond the frame. But the mother's face was turned away, as if she didn't deserve to be seen, while the daughter glowed with life that seemed to pulse off the canvas. Emma recognized the location, Victoria Park, not far from where Sophie had died. Emma's phone buzzed. Her mother, texting about another late shift, another month of scraping by. The parallel wasn't lost on her. She too was a daughter trying to make her mother proud, trying to justify sacrifices made. The difference was, she still had time, still had chances Victoria would never get again. Days later, the gallery buzzed with news of the latest anonymous sale, £8 million to fund a new rehabilitation centre in East London. The buyers, a Chinese tech billionaire couple, posed for photos while Victoria stood in the background, her face a masterpiece of professional satisfaction that only Emma recognised as barely contained anguish. "Quite the mystery, isn't it?" Richard Thornbury, the gallery's senior curator, sidled up to Emma during the reception. "Our anonymous artist. I've been trying to solve it for years." His smile was predatory, sensing opportunity. "You catalogue everything. Surely you've noticed patterns." Emma's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Just paintings coming in and going out. Nothing special." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Nothing special. These pieces have raised £30 million. The story alone would be worth a fortune. Imagine the documentary rights, the book deals." He leaned closer. "If you notice anything at all, you come to me first. Could be quite beneficial for an ambitious intern." That night, Emma found herself standing where Sophie had died, under Waterloo Bridge. The Thames flowed dark and indifferent, carrying the city's secrets out to sea. She thought about truth and its consequences, about grief that shaped itself into beauty, about mothers and daughters, and the words left unspoken until it was too late. Her phone rang. Her mother, tired but cheerful, asking about her day. "Are you happy there, love? Is it worth it?" Emma watched a homeless man settle onto a bench, wrapping newspapers around himself for warmth. Tomorrow, he might find his way to one of the shelters funded by Victoria's paintings. "I'm learning, Mum, about art and other things. Just remember who you are, Emma. Don't let that fancy world change you." After hanging up, Emma made a decision. She would keep Victoria's secret, but she wouldn't remain passive. If Victoria needed to paint her grief, Emma would make sure those paintings reached the people who needed them most. Emma became a shadow with purpose. She learned Victoria's patterns, the nights when the weight became too heavy and she'd escape to her Hackney studio. On those nights, Emma would ensure the security logs showed nothing unusual, would create small distractions that kept curious staff away from areas Victoria might pass through. She also began volunteering at the shelters that received funding from the anonymous sales, wanting to see the impact firsthand. At the Salvation Army Centre in Whitechapel, she met James, a former banker whose life had unraveled after his daughter's death. "The grief," he told her over weak tea, "it's like drowning in air. You look normal, but inside you're suffocating." Emma thought of Victoria, suffocating in her Mayfair office, and understood that homelessness wasn't always about lacking walls. Sometimes it was about being unable to find home within yourself. Marcus noticed her transformation first. "You're different," he observed one morning, as Emma expertly deflected another curator's questions about delivery schedules. "Stronger, like you found your purpose here." If only he knew, Emma had become the guardian of a secret that grew heavier each day. She watched Victoria pour her soul onto canvases that sold for millions, watched her sign papers that would build new shelters, create rehabilitation programs, offer second chances to people Sophie never got. The crisis came suddenly. Richard Thornbury had hired a private investigator, convinced that uncovering the anonymous artist's identity would cement his position as Victoria's successor. Emma discovered this when she overheard him on a phone call, boasting about how close he was to the truth. "The paint suppliers," he said smugly, "track the high-end oils, the specific brands used in the anonymous paintings. There are only 3 suppliers in London who stock that particular shade of cobalt blue." Emma's mind raced. She knew Victoria's next painting was nearly complete. She'd seen it through the warehouse window, a masterpiece depicting a phoenix rising from the ashes of a council estate. If Richard traced the suppliers now, he'd find Victoria's recent purchases. That evening, Emma did something that could have ended her career before it began. She used the gallery's credit card, meant for office supplies, to purchase the same oils from all 3 suppliers, creating a false trail that led nowhere. She then visited Victoria's studio supplier personally, paying cash for a different brand that could create the same effects, leaving a note explaining the danger without revealing how she knew. Victoria said nothing the next day, but Emma noticed the slight nod of acknowledgement when their eyes met across the gallery floor. The painting arrived on schedule, now created with different materials, but the same heartbreaking beauty. Richard's investigation hit dead ends at every turn. Suppliers had conflicting records, security footage mysteriously corrupted during key moments, and delivery drivers could never quite remember details about their anonymous collection runs. Emma orchestrated it all with a precision that surprised even herself, drawing on skills she didn't know she possessed, the ability to protect someone who had never shown her kindness because she understood the magnitude of their pain. One evening, while working late on legitimate cataloguing, Emma found Victoria standing behind her, silent as a ghost. They looked at each other for a long moment, the weight of unspoken knowledge hanging between them. "The new rehabilitation center opens next month," Victoria said finally, her voice neutral. "The one in Bethnal Green, near where you grew up, isn't it?" Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Sophie would have been 28 next week," Victoria continued, staring at the latest anonymous painting, awaiting documentation. "She wanted to be an artist, said she'd paint the invisible people, make the world see them." The silence stretched between them, filled with everything that couldn't be said. Then Victoria turned and walked away, her heels echoing in the empty gallery. But she'd left something on Emma's desk, a small photograph, different from the one Emma had glimpsed before. This one showed Sophie painting, her face alive with joy and purpose, creating art that would never be sold or seen. Emma understood the trust being offered, the acknowledgement that she'd become part of something larger than either of them. The exhibition opening for modern masters should have been another glittering success. Champagne flowed, critics mingled with collectors, and million-pound deals were whispered in corners. Emma moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, ensuring glasses were filled and conversations guided away from dangerous topics. She didn't see the journalist until it was too late. David Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, from The Guardian, had been investigating the anonymous artist for months. Unlike Richard's ham-fisted attempts, David was methodical, patient, and worst of all, he had a source inside one of the homeless shelters who'd noticed something crucial. A woman matching Victoria's description had been seen visiting Sophie Whitmore's grave every time a new anonymous painting was delivered. Emma watched in growing horror as David cornered Victoria near the bar. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm writing a piece on the anonymous artist. I have some questions about your daughter, Sophie. The champagne glass in Victoria's hand trembled almost imperceptibly. I don't discuss personal matters with the press. But surely you must have thoughts on how the anonymous artist seems particularly focused on homeless causes. Given Sophie's story, how dare you? Victoria's voice could have frozen flames. My daughter's death is not your story to exploit, David persisted, sensing he was close to something. The paintings began appearing exactly 6 months after Sophie died. The timing is remarkable, wouldn't you say? Emma moved without thinking, accidentally, bumping into David with a full tray of champagne. Glasses shattered, golden liquid soaked his shirt and notebook, and in the chaos, Victoria disappeared into her office. I'm so sorry, Emma gasped, dabbing uselessly at his ruined shirt while security approached. Let me get you cleaned up. But David's eyes were sharp with suspicion. You're the intern who catalogues everything, aren't you, Emma Chen? He pulled out his phone, showing her a photo from shelter security footage. Emma carrying a painting-sized package. Funny how you always seem to be around when anonymous paintings appear. Emma's blood ran cold. I don't know what you're implying. I'm implying that you know exactly who the anonymous artist is, and you're protecting them. David stepped closer. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. This story, it's about redemption, about beauty from pain. The public deserves to know. The public deserves. Emma's voice surprised her with its strength. What about what Sophie deserved? What about what her mother deserves? Some pain isn't meant to be public entertainment. David studied her for a long moment. So it is Victoria. Emma said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. That night, Emma found Victoria in her hidden studio, not painting but sitting on the floor, surrounded by canvases of Sophie at every age. The woman who terrorized the art world looked broken, fragile, every one of her 53 years visible in the slump of her shoulders. He knows, Victoria said simply. That journalist, he'll publish tomorrow. Emma sat down beside her, careful not to touch. Maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing. Victoria's laugh was bitter. You don't understand. The anonymous artist works because it's pure. No ego, no personality cult, no story except the art itself. The moment it becomes about me, about my guilt, my failure as a mother, it all becomes tainted. Just another rich woman's vanity project. That's not what it is, Emma said quietly. I've been to the shelters. I've seen the people whose lives have changed because of what you've done. They don't care who you are. They care that someone saw them as worthy of beauty, of investment, of hope. Victoria turned to look at her fully for the first time. Why did you protect me? I've been nothing but cruel to you. Emma thought of her own mother, working double shifts, sacrificing everything. Because love doesn't always look like kindness. Sometimes it looks like anger turned inward. Sometimes it looks like paintings sold to save strangers because you couldn't save the one person who mattered most. They sat in silence as London hummed outside, the city of 8 million souls, each carrying their own secret griefs. There's something else, Victoria said finally. Richard Thornbury. He's been embezzling from the anonymous sales. Not much, but enough. I have proof, but if I use it, it reveals you knew about the sales intimately, Emma finished. You're trapped, Victoria nodded. Unless the plan was audacious in its simplicity. If David Chen was going to publish his story, they would give him a better one. Richard Thornbury's theft from charitable funds. A scandal that would explode across the art world and bury any other revelation in its wake. Emma worked through the night, using her cataloging access to compile evidence of Richard's embezzlement. 3% skimmed from each anonymous sale, hidden in inflated handling fees that went to a shell company in the Caymans. Over 5 years, he'd stolen nearly £1 million meant for the homeless. Meanwhile, Victoria created one final painting, her masterpiece. It showed 2 figures on Waterloo Bridge at dawn, one solid, one translucent, reaching for each other across an impossible divide. It was Sophie and Victoria, forgiveness and regret, love and loss, painted with such raw honesty that Emma wept when she saw it. "This will be the last anonymous painting," Victoria said, stepping back from the canvas. "After the story breaks, win or lose, the anonymous artist dies." David Chen arrived at the gallery the next morning, ready to file his story. Emma intercepted him at the door with a USB drive. "This is what you're really looking for," she said. "The biggest art scandal of the decade. Richard Thornbury has been stealing from charity for years." David's eyes widened as he scanned the evidence. Jesus, this is huge. But what about the anonymous artist?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes the most powerful art is the kind that doesn't need a signature. Isn't the real story about impact, not identity?" David looked between Emma and the gallery, where Victoria could be seen through the window, conducting a meeting with her usual icy authority. "She's quite something, isn't she, to carry that weight alone?" "We all carry weight," Emma replied. "The lucky ones find a way to transform it into something meaningful." The story broke that afternoon. Richard Thornbury's arrest made headlines across the country, the art world reeling from the revelation that one of its most respected figures had been stealing from the homeless. In the chaos, David's article about the anonymous artist was published too, but with a different angle than planned. A meditation on art, redemption, and the power of anonymity in an age of constant exposure. He never named Victoria, though careful readers might read between the lines. The final anonymous painting sold for £15 million, the highest price yet. The buyer was a consortium of London museums who announced it would be permanently displayed with a simple plaque, "For all the invisible souls who deserve to be seen." Victoria stood at the back of the auction room, watching as her heart's work disappeared into public ownership. Emma stood beside her, no longer the invisible intern, but something more, a keeper of secrets, a guardian of grief transformed into grace. "What will you do now?" Emma asked as they watched the painting being carefully wrapped for transport. "I'll run my gallery. I'll be cold and difficult and exacting, because that's who I need to be to survive." Victoria paused. "But perhaps I'll also fund that internship program you proposed. Paid positions for kids from East London." "Sophie would have liked that," Emma smiled. "She would have loved it." As they turned to leave, Victoria did something unprecedented. She placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me when I couldn't bear to be seen." The moment passed quickly, Victoria's armor sliding back into place as they returned to the public eye. But Emma carried the warmth of that touch, that acknowledgement that she had witnessed something profound and chosen to protect it rather than profit from it. Weeks later, a package arrived at Emma's flat. Inside was a small painting, not part of the anonymous collection, but something private. It showed a young woman at a desk, cataloging art. But in the reflection of the frame she was cataloging, you could see wings sprouting from her shoulders. The note was unsigned, but Emma recognized the handwriting. "For the guardian angel I never deserved, but desperately needed. Your real education starts now." 5 years had passed since that night under Waterloo Bridge, when Emma had chosen silence over exposure. The Whitmore Gallery stood transformed, though few understood the depth of change beneath its polished surface. Emma, now senior curator, walked through halls that had once intimidated her, her second-hand shoes replaced with confident steps that belonged. The Sophie Whitmore Foundation, publicly established a year after the anonymous artist's last painting, had become London's most effective organization for helping young people escape homelessness and addiction. Victoria ran it with the same fierce precision she brought to the gallery, but Emma saw what others missed. The way Victoria's hands trembled when she presented each success story, each life saved that Sophie's couldn't be. "We have a problem," Marcus said, approaching Emma in what was once the archive where she'd spent her intern days. "There's another journalist sniffing around. This one claims to have proof about the anonymous artist's identity." Emma's heart skipped, but her face remained calm. "There's always someone claiming to have proof. This is different. She has paintings, early works from before, from when Sophie was alive. They match the anonymous style perfectly." That evening, Emma found Victoria in her office, the same room where Emma had first glimpsed her crying 5 years ago. The director had aged gracefully but definitively, her silver hair now white, her sharp edges softened by time, and the quiet satisfaction of lives saved. "I know about the journalist," Victoria said without preamble. "Sarah Martinez. She's Sophie's friend from art school. She has paintings Sophie and I did together when I was teaching her technique." Emma sank into a chair. "What does she want?" "To tell Sophie's story. The real story. She says the world should know that the anonymous artist was really both of us, that I was finishing what Sophie started." Victoria pulled out a portfolio, spreading paintings across her desk. They were clearly Sophie's work, but with corrections, additions. In a hand Emma recognized as Victoria's, mother and daughter creating together. "These are beautiful," Emma breathed, seeing the evolution from Sophie's raw talent to the refined power of the anonymous works. "Sophie always said art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable." Victoria smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "I forgot that after she died. Became all about disturbance, no comfort. The anonymous artist was my way back to what she taught me." Sarah Martinez arrived the next morning, a woman in her early 30s with paint under her fingernails and Sophie's picture on a pendant around her neck. Emma watched from the doorway as she and Victoria faced each other, two women bound by love for someone lost. "I'm not trying to hurt you," Sarah said, "but Sophie deserves credit. She started these paintings. The Homeless series was her idea, her passion. You know that." Victoria nodded slowly. "I do. But Sophie also understood that sometimes the message matters more than the messenger. Would revealing this truth serve her vision, or would it just satisfy curiosity?" Sarah pulled out her phone, showing them a video. It was Sophie, alive and vibrant, painting in the very studio Victoria now used. "I don't care if anyone knows my name," Sophie was saying to the camera. "I just want them to see, really see. My mum thinks art is about recognition, but she's wrong. It's about recognition of a different kind, recognizing humanity in places people don't want to look." Victoria's breath caught. Emma had never seen her cry openly before, but tears flowed freely now. "She talked about you constantly," Sarah continued. "How you were the one who taught her that technique with light. How you understood composition in a way she was still learning. She wanted to collaborate with you, but I was too proud," Victoria finished. "Too concerned with my reputation to paint with my daughter about subjects I deemed beneath the gallery's standing." She looked at the paintings spread across her desk. Every anonymous piece was that collaboration, just 5 years too late. The three women sat in silence, the weight of truth and time between them. Finally, Emma spoke. "What if we told a different truth? Not about the anonymous artist's identity, but about Sophie's vision. A retrospective of her work, showing how one young woman's passion inspired a movement that saved hundreds of lives." Sarah looked skeptical. "Without mentioning Victoria's role?" "My role," Victoria said firmly, "was that of a mother who learned too late to see through her daughter's eyes. That's not the story here. The story is Sophie's vision becoming reality, even after she was gone." They worked together over the following months, creating an exhibition that London would never forget. Invisible No More, the Sophie Whitmore vision, opened on what would have been Sophie's 33rd birthday. The gallery was transformed. Gone was the austere coldness, replaced with warmth, life, and hope. The paintings told a story. Sophie's early works, full of raw promise and unflinching honesty about life on the margins. The collaborative pieces, where mother and daughter's hands met on canvas. And finally, a surprise that took everyone's breath away. New paintings created by artists who had been homeless, funded by the anonymous sales, trained in Sophie's techniques. Victoria stood before the crowd on opening night, Emma and Sarah flanking her like pillars of support. "My daughter saw beauty where I saw failure," she began, her voice carrying through the silent room. "She saw potential where I saw problems. She saw humans where I saw statistics. I failed her in life, but perhaps we can all succeed in carrying forward her vision. The revelation, when it came, was gentle. Victoria didn't announce herself as the anonymous artist, but she didn't deny it when a BBC documentary later that year drew the connections, showing how grief had transformed into grace, how a mother's love had found expression in the only way left to her. Emma watched from her new office. Victoria had promoted her to deputy director as the art world struggled to process the truth. Some called it exploitation, others called it redemption. But in the shelters of East London, in the rehabilitation centres and halfway houses, they called it hope. "You know," Marcus said, joining Emma, as she watched Victoria lead a group of young artists from the Sophie Foundation through the gallery, "you could have made a fortune selling this story years ago." Emma smiled, thinking of her mother, now retired thanks to Emma's success, but more importantly, proud of the woman her daughter had become. "Some things are worth more than money." Like what? Emma watched Victoria pause before Sophie's portrait, touching the frame gently, then moving on to teach, to inspire, to continue the work of seeing the invisible. Like learning that love doesn't always look like love. Sometimes it looks like protection. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like art that refuses to be owned by anyone's name. The anonymous artist never painted again, but Sophie's vision lived on in every young person who picked up a brush in the Foundation studios, in every life saved by the shelters, in every moment Victoria allowed herself to be seen not as the dragon of the art world, but as a mother who had learned, too late but not in vain, to paint her love in actions rather than words. As the sun set over London, casting golden light through the gallery's windows, Emma understood that she had been part of something greater than art, greater than truth, greater than success. She had been part of a resurrection, not of the dead, but of the living who had forgotten how to live. The intern who knew the artist's identity had said nothing until now, and in that silence she had learned to speak volumes.